The following podcast is proudly brought to you by Vite Ramen. Use the link in the description and use offer code BrokenSilicon to get 10% off tasty, healthy, and easy to make ramen. And also use the offer code BrokenSilicon to get 25% off Windows keys and die shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website at cdkeyoffer.com. Now on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and I guess I'm joined today, like I am, on every news episode by my co-host.
Yo, what up? It's Dan.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. That was a weird, awkward intro by me. I didn't have any witty idea ready, and then I paused like, is there anything I can do to spice up the intro for Dan? And the answer is just no. I got nothing today.
Sometimes you have something, sometimes you don't. I don't know what to tell you, man.
Yeah, the one thing I definitely have is relief after getting over what I can, to my memory, is the first cold I've had in like 2 or 3 years. And it was just weird when I got it like a few days ago, and I was like, oh, this is a cold. This is a normal cold. This feels like a normal cold. I'm going to sneeze a bit for 2 days. I'm going to have a slightly sore throat, and then it's going to be gone. And I'm not going to lose my taste. There's not going to be some bizarre feeling of achiness. And it's just so funny how different a cold feels compared to getting COVID, how obvious it is. Like, it almost felt good. It almost felt good to feel a normal sickness again.
I can't speak to that because I have somehow still avoided getting COVID, but
now, are you genuinely surprised you haven't gotten it once?
I have been working in person since May of 2020, so yes.
Yeah, and I work, of course, at home with very little contact outside of course, extracurricular activities like on the weekends with friends or something. It's so weird to call it that, extracurricular activities with friends. It's like I'm 12 years old.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all that has to, for me, that says the protocols that we've had on campus have worked. So, but, the masks are coming off at work now and stuff. So, and there still hasn't been a huge outbreak, but, like 98% of the campus is vaccinated. So,
yeah,
it's been a good time.
Yeah, I will say I was reading around, and there are numerous reports of super colds going around now that everybody is going outside again maskless. Just, I remember at the start of this pandemic, people talking about how, hey, flu cases and cold cases are just completely plummeting. Maybe we'll kill those off. Nope.
No, that's probably unrealistic. There's too many strains of cold to ever go away, and animal reservoirs exist for the flu, so they're going to be there forever. Unfortunately.
That'd be a good band name, Animal Reservoirs.
Yeah, I'll go start that quick.
Mm-hmm. Well, Melodic Warrior writes in, just like you guys can if you support us on Patreon, and he says, save this for a news episode in parentheses. Okay, well, we did. Today, I met 2 people who are fans of your content. The first was a client of mine who is going to school. He is studying computer engineering, and he said your content is helping him understand what is coming down the pipe from a design point of view. He has already found it useful in classwork. The other person was someone I met through my sister's friend. All in all, the content, at least in the premium and professional space, is definitely having a large reach, I find. I'm even finding that in recent times, my dad is asking questions, and he is an electrical engineer by trade. The future is bright, and I'm certain the best is yet to come for this channel. P.S. I'm amused when I tell my friends and viewers that in real life I'm actually a mod for this team. Their reaction is always stunned and priceless.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're helping people with computer science homework somehow.
Yeah, I know. I've run into one person who recognized me. That was a while ago, though. I do know one of my friends, Drew, said that once he was sent a link by a friend on a graphics card's coming out, and it was one of my videos, and Drew's like, yeah, I know that guy. I saw him last week. He's like, what? He's like, yeah, that's my friend.
Like a friend from high school.
It's interesting, it's a smaller channel, I think. Some people think it's big now. I guess for the niche, it's probably become big, but like 132,000. Actually, we just crossed 132,000 subscribers like a day ago. That I've really only believe. Okay, wait. I've been recognized once in person, if you don't count at the Carolina Game Summit that I was recognized. But that was by like another person who worked at one of the companies. So he was like, actually, it's funny. I was going up one escalator. He was going down another one past me. He just points at me and goes, Tom, Moore's Law is dead. So I don't know if you count someone who like works at a system integrator as technically being recognized in person by someone who's not a super dork. I guess everyone here, if they know our channel, is probably a super dork. I mean, you have to follow this dork. But I guess my point is, I think friends of mine have met people that know who I am more than I have.
I mean, maybe I don't. I can think of a couple instances. I'm not sure, and I know there was like one time when your channel was actually still pretty small that you coincidentally met someone.
Yeah, that's the time. It's like 20,000 people. I think what this suggests is I just don't go outside enough. I think, if I'm being honest, that's probably why. I don't know how else you explain my friends meeting people who know who I am more than I have.
That's a good point.
But otherwise, I thought it'd be nice to open up with that lighthearted reader mail. We have no corrections and omissions today, which must mean that we've obtained Pope-like infallibility. I assume that's what that means, right?
Yeah, we'll never say anything inaccurate ever again, I bet.
And I'm sure no one in the comments will ever accuse us of getting things wrong. So let us move on, though, to story number 1. RX 6950 XT at 1100, RX 6750 XT at 550, and RX 6650 XT at 400 launch with 4 to 8% more performance than their unoverclocked predecessors. On May 10th, AMD finally launched the RDNA 2 refresh that has been heavily rumored and arguably over-discussed for months now. The breakdown is as follows. The 6950 XT, like we said, is $1,100, brings 3 to 6% more performance at 335 watts than the 6900 XT, and it has a 10% higher cost. 6750 XT at that $550 price point, 6 to 9% performance increase at 250 watts with a 15% higher cost than the 6700 XT. And the 6650 XT brings a measly 2 to 5% performance increase at 13% more power at 180 watts, costing 5% higher, $400 compared to $380. So in other words, the MSRP price increase of these SKUs is almost exactly double the performance increase, so meh. However, some good news is that Moore's Law is dead can report availability on the AIB models is high, speaking to some distributors before recording, and while some will obviously try to gouge with a couple models, early indications are that these products should stay pretty close to MSRP for the most of the product life, and in doing so, put further pressure on NVIDIA cards in the non-50 XT models that preceded them. Yeah, and I guess full disclosure, we're recording this before reviews go live, but we know several people that work at these large review houses, and I have 3 sources confirming that pricing. So at least as of this recording, that is the pricing. I guess it'd be funny if this episode came out and they lowered it again, but all evidence is that's not going to happen. So we know the pricing ahead of time. We've seen the benchmarks before they've gone live, and yeah, I know, Dan. What do you think about these 5% better products?
Part of me wonders if these have gotten discussed so much. I don't remember exactly when they leaked, but they seem to have leaked relatively early relative to like what type of product this is, because this is kind of just a small stopgap product that they can release and make slightly more money off of, I'm guessing because of higher bidding than when they initially launched all of these cards. And I guess they also have 18 gigabit per second memory now, right? But there's not much to be said about them other than that they're slightly better than what they're replacing and slightly more expensive. Like, if you're asking me a 6950 at $1,100 and a 6900 XT at $1,000, I mean, I don't know which one I would recommend. I guess if you're spending that much money, spend the extra $100, but that's all
I
I
mean,
can
if you're
say.
spending over 1,000, you clearly don't care about money. Although I will say, let me check here on Newegg. I believe the 6900 XT is already getting. It's $950 after rebate for a gigabyte model right now.
Hmm.
And so I don't know. The way I see it is just a gigantic meh. And at the end of the day, at least this puts more pressure on everything else going down in price.
I suppose it does, but I kind of think that trend or force was already there before
Yeah, I
these
know.
even came out. Like you said, a 6900 XT is currently selling for $950 with rebate. Part of me wonders if maybe the fact that these have been so over discussed that there are like people that are not getting the 6900 with the expectation that they can get a 6950 XT. But
Maybe a little.
I don't know how widespread the leakosphere is to the general people that are buying it. You know what I mean?
Leakosphere.
The leakosphere.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the overwhelming majority of people don't pay that close attention when these things are coming out. Yeah, even with like things like 6950 XT, not most gamers don't. Even people who get like 3090s don't watch that many leak videos. I'm trying to think of really what else there's to say. I guess this just kind of makes up for, frankly, what I've found is Ampere gaining performance over RDNA 2 over time. This fine wine argument that people were making, I think it should be called Raja fine wine, because it's when Raja helps make an architecture, it seems to age better with GCN because the drivers weren't done on time. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I have a 6700 XT here right now that someone let me borrow just to like update my benchmarks. And I've got to say, compared to when I reviewed the 6700 XT to the 3070, I guess the good news for the 6700 XT is its rendering editing performance has improved. But outside of that in gaming, if anything, the 3070s gained more performance, relatively speaking, than the 6700 XT is. And that's also what Steve at Hardware Unboxed surprised. I found similar results to Steve, that if anything, the 3070 in 4K is actually now firmly like a little stronger than the 6700 XT, with the 6700 XT only narrowly beating the 3060 Ti in 4K. I think this overclocking will make up for that, and right now I believe on Newegg 6700 XTs are selling for about $550. So look, if they can drop something that's like 8% stronger at the same price that then ties or slightly beats the 3070 with more RAM, good, but this really doesn't honestly move the needle basically at all in my mind.
Yeah, and these types of things, these products like rarely do. This is just an end of gen refresh, which we kind of get get those relatively frequently, like with CPUs, like the end of gen refresh from last generation or the 5800 X3D. There are these things that they can put out at near the end of the generation to either keep a price higher or get a new price point, but these aren't going to be around for all of that long, and it's not like a generational uplift. It's a minor increase that might get a few people to upgrade from what they previously had.
And yeah, I think actually on that note, Hardware Unboxed just did a review, or on the previous note I said, and found the 3060 seems to have gained a little bit on the 6600 XT. So again, all this does is now they can just firmly say, they can firmly say the 6950 XT matches or beats the 3090, unless you're doing ray tracing. The 6750 XT is as strong as the 3070. The 6650 XT is definitely stronger than a 3060. But again, like with how prices are going, if a 6600 XT is going below 380, just get that and overclock it, honestly, man.
Yeah, and that's I think that's kind of the what this generation is you have like a range of cards you're interested in, and then it's like, well, this is the first card that reached the price I'm willing to pay for that specific one, and I guess I'll get that one now instead of maybe a 6700 or instead of like a 6800 XT because it's available.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I want to check before we move on to the next story is just kind of a sanity check on where Nvidia prices are, because they have not been falling, at least in the new market, not the used market, as fast as AMD's cards have been in price. So let me just Yeah, like the RTX 3070. I mean, good God. The thing's still selling for $700. So that's the one thing I will say, though, is you can be critical of like the 6750 XT all you want. And I do find it odd they didn't just make it like $529 or $500 flat. But at the same time, if the 3070 is selling for $700, no. And if I look at the 3060 Ti here, and I know there will be
It's
someone who's like, oh, I got one for,
they're selling for
$200.
the floor is 580 for a 3060 Ti right now.
Yeah, and look, if you find a 3060 Ti for $400, I choose that over something that costs 30% more that just gives you more RAM in the 6700 or 6750 XT. But most of the time, you're paying more for a 3060 Ti than a 6750 XT that has 50% more RAM and probably beats it by 10%. I think that you can, as usual, these cards will probably get critical reviews and people will ignore that Nvidia street price is just higher.
That's kind of what it looks like, and I guess you have to caveat it with that it's an ASRock 6700 XT, which I think their graphics cards generally aren't that great if I'm remembering correctly. But there is a 6700 XT on Newegg right now for $500, so
Exactly.
it's selling below the 3060 Ti, and yeah, like you said, maybe the 3060 Ti there is a price point that's more compelling, that makes it more compelling than the 6700 XT, but the pricing certainly isn't there right now.
All right. Well, let us move on then to story number 2. Intel Arc A750, A580, and A380 GPUs launch update. More whispers and rumors continue to emerge about Desktop Alchemist, and yeah, it seems like the worries voiced by Moore's Law is dead and recent broken silicons is becoming more and more likely to be well-founded. Alchemist is basically a budget mid-range launch in late Q2 and early Q3. In summary, the latest rumors suggest A380 and A750 should at least be unveiled by Computex this month and bring a $150 RX 6400 or 6500 XT competitor, a $350 RTX 3060 or 3060 Ti competitor this summer, and that the A580 is now rumored to launch as a 3050 killer below $300 in July. And thus far, the A780, the 3070 competitor, seems poised to indeed be a limited edition release late July or August, just as Moore's Law had suggested seemed likely after Intel officially announced a limited edition launch in summer, which is notable because they called all of the other launches early summer, suggesting a technically beginning of Q3 launch. At the end of the day, what else is there to say? All of this hinges on Intel finally getting a grip on the drivers over this month. But if Intel launches a 16 gigabyte $450 3070 competitor, a 12 gigabyte $350 3060 or 3060 Ti competitor, and a 6 gigabyte $150 Navi 23 competitor, even a month before Lovelace launches, it could act as a decent lifeline to the market when AMD and Nvidia let stock dry up before their new product lines launch. And indeed, at this point, that's probably the best Alchemist will be at the end of the day. And it's worth remembering that pricing can certainly change before launch. Companies change pricing last minute all the time. So there you go, Dan. I can't let me say this: you can't 100% confirm the pricing because Intel could change it. Again, I'm telling you guys, the RDNA 2 refresh cards, they had different pricing a month ago. But this seems pretty legit here, guys. Like $150 for a Navi 23 competitor, but it has 6 gigabytes. Yeah, $350 for a 12 gigabyte kind of 3060 to 3060 Ti performance, and then 16 gigabytes for a 16 gigabyte 3070. I mean, I don't know. What do you think about this, Stan?
Oh, at the end of the day, then, if pricing all turns out to be accurate to what gets released, like the $150 one kind of sounds like the most interesting card to me because there's an actual low-end card at a low-end price point where the 6500 XT is at $200 is what we used to think of as mid-range, and $150, I think.
Well,
that will probably get good reviews and pull the price of like the 6500 XT down with it. Other than that, these cards are just like we've been saying for months now. Yeah, months now, I guess. This is going to be kind of too little too late. like you say, there's going to be that month bridge where they might be the most compelling thing to buy, but
They might be the only thing on the market. I really do hear a lot of rumors that Nvidia is going to totally let stock dry up after this month. So that would be nice if, and again, everyone's like, only 4 million cards. It's like, yes, but that's like a third of what you would expect out of these companies in like one quarter or something. So if they add a third more stock in 1 month where there is no stock from the other companies, that's what Intel should at least try to do, because it would be noticeable. Anything besides that, though, no one's going to care.
it's just not I think it's a somewhat precarious position to be in, being the stopgap generation for your competitors, who that's what everyone is waiting for anyways. And I don't know who's going to be buying like a set, what's the mid-range, like an A750 or something as a stopgap card. I think that's maybe more what like the A380 are. Yeah, the A580 or the A380 would be. And then at the end of the day, when they release their quote unquote high end card, that's going to be a mid range card within like a couple weeks, maybe, or will be a solidly mid range, maybe even low end card in a couple weeks. So all I can really say is like, hopefully Battle Mage comes in 6 months. 6 months, 6 to 9 months after this. And without that, I mean, I think Intel's just behind on their graphics card releases, and they need to step up the cadence if they actually want to be interesting against AMD and Nvidia.
I think at this point, and I kind of assume this is what they're going to try to do, and maybe it's half of the reason it's taking so long, is they realized months ago, we're not going to be able to launch early without sacrificing quality of drivers some.
Mm-hmm.
And so all we can do is try to be respectable, not a big deal. We're not going to be a big deal. We know we're not going to be a big deal. But at least if we have a respectable launch with respectable performance, with respectable pricing, we won't be remembered badly. Like, they've got to be looking at how the 6500 XT was perceived, fair or not, and go, let's just not do that. We're only selling 4 million of these things this year. This is a drop in the bucket compared to our normal yearly revenue. I would actually hope that what they end up doing is bringing something that is slightly weaker than a 6500 XT, but has more RAM for 150, and they make like, I don't know. I think they'd probably be breaking even actually at 150, which I was already told specifically that model will probably be sold at cost to make a big deal out of it. But hey, good encoding performance, maybe better than the 6500 XT ray tracing, enough RAM. That's not bad. That's a decent budget graphics card, and which this market hasn't seen a decent budget graphics card for years. So that'd be nice. And then I think they need to be more aggressive. I think you put that at 150. And I think you put the 3060 competitor, which hopefully sounds like it's actually a little stronger than that, like 10% stronger than 3060. Hopefully they just bring that 12 gigabyte card out, put it at $300. I know at $300, they're probably making like a $10, $20 profit. Just do that. People will look at it and go, hey, I need a budget mid-range card. This was $300 with 12 gigabytes. Drivers work well. I'm happy I bought it. And again, so on and so forth. $400, 16 gigabyte card. At $400, I am sure Intel's making like a $20, $30 profit. Just have people remember they worked, they were priced well, and we may have forgotten about them, but we don't remember that they at least left a okay taste in our mouth, because you don't want to leave a bad taste in your mouth. Just make it $400 and 16 gigabytes, dude.
Yeah,
it's not going to launch early anyways.
Especially if ZSS and their ray tracing turn out well. Like, if they're relatively good compared to what AMD and Nvidia have at the respective tiers and performance, I think that'll at least be a good advertising round. Like, look how good this technology is, and then next time they have something, people will be primed to at least be interested in Battle Mage, and they can actually enter presumably they can actually enter the high end.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I want to say on this story is just to really zero in on a major point here. When I saw Intel officially say limited edition high-end Alchemist, summer. Whereas every other date they were saying earlier in the presentation was early summer. Early summer meaning what? End of like June, right? Isn't that when summer begins? End of near mid-late June?
End of June, yeah.
Yeah. So if that's early summer, one could even argue July falls into early summer. And they say the limited edition run is summer. I don't know where these people were saying, oh, that means end of quarter two. To me, that sounds most likely like beginning or mid quarter three, guys. Like,
I mean, yeah, summer ends mid, right? Yeah, summer ends mid quarter. No, near the end of quarter three. So
exactly.
They could say late summer. I mean,
September.
Summer ends in September. Like, oh yeah, so summer ends in September. They could even be all the way in quarter four with a summer release, I guess.
Right. So I think what they meant by that is late July or beginning of August is what they're sure they can meet. And then you combine that with the fact that months ago I had a source tell me that the reference model that I've been leaking this whole time, the standard 2-fan one, not a limited edition looking one, that model might not even be ready till quarter four. Well, I think of that whisper and I think of limited edition summer, and I'm like, oh, so like the Frontier edition is July, August, the mainstream is September or something. And then hearing that they may not even release that model that I leaked a year ago, that it might not ever come out. And then I see this leak come out now that shows the cut down models coming out first. I'm forced to go, yeah, so it sounds like the mid-range and low-end launches, and then they're just going to do a limited run of the high-end for desktop only. Just limited run, and most of the high-end will be saved for laptop.
Yeah.
Which is a smart thing to do, by the way, because I don't think mobile Lovelace will be ready till early next year. So now's the time to put all of it to laptop if you can, and just launch it to desktop to say you did and frankly get experience launching on desktop.
I think Intel still has a more positive it's still more positively perceived right now in the laptop space than they are in the desktop space. So, makes sense to try to do a push.
Units.
Yeah.
Speaking of moving units, that doesn't work. Let's just move on to story number 3. Lovelace rumors update. What the hell is going on? And I have a small write-up here. Over the past couple of weeks, Lovelace rumors have become odd and contentious, at least in this writer's opinion. Everything from 900-watt TDPs to insane tripling performance and rasterization claims are being thrown around like a beach ball at a drunken beach concert. And I would like to ask, has everyone lost their minds? Did people learn nothing from 2020's leak cycle?
No.
Dan says no. Of most importance is highlighting that the node upgrade Nvidia is getting going from 8 nanometer at Samsung to a custom 4 nanometer at TSMC is smaller than what they got going from 28 nanometer on Maxwell to 16 nanometer on Pascal, and maybe slightly a larger upgrade than what they got going from Pascal to Ampere. So with all of that in mind, Ampere compared to Pascal increased power consumption by 30 to 40%, increased die sizes by 25%, and yet only brought a 45 to 55% performance increase. So we know Lovelace will increase power over Ampere by 30 to 50% again, and although the node shrink is a bit better than before, being on a custom 4 nanometer that likely pulls from both N4P and early N4X libraries, the die size isn't increasing this time around according to, well, all sources. So how are they possibly increasing performance by more than like 2.5x, even 3x? If doubling performance, it would just be an incredible accomplishment for them to even double performance with all of that in mind, guys. I want to also add to that I've always maintained ray tracing performance is likely 20% higher than the raster increase. So it's not like I'm ignoring how big of the gains are going to be in some scenarios. Furthermore, 600 watts is directly confirmed as the power usage for the 4090. This isn't some random engineering sample, guys. I'm telling you, this is what it's going to be. So it's not like these other gains are being ignored as well. And I don't know. In conclusion, I really advise people take some caution in the more insane claims going around right now for Lovelace performance increases. I don't know, Dan. What do you have to say about this? There's really been some outrageous things put out there, and the more I look at like what's possible from node shrinks, I don't know where people think this performance is coming from.
I don't even know if everyone who's talking about this knows where it's coming from. I think this is just, for some reason, the hype train that happens seemingly every in the lead up to every new generation. For some reason, people want to be set up to be disappointed by impressive, what are likely going to be impressive releases, at least from a performance increase standpoint. I mean, if the 4090 is using like 600 watts, it's more of a woohoo, I guess. But I think there's, for some reason, becomes an inflated expectation, or maybe there's some type of like ratcheting up of, well, I heard it's going to be 80% stronger. Oh, yeah, well, I heard it's going to be 2 times stronger. I heard it's going to be 2.5. And I don't know, people get progressively more and more excited about seeing a bigger number. Like, that's kind of what it sounds like to me. And then it ends up being double, or 80% or double the performance over this gen, and that somehow disappoints some people. Like, I don't get the purpose of it, but it's seems to have happened, 2 times? I mean, Ampere was the first, right? Ampere was the first, like, full product cycle this channel went through, kind of, right? Like,
Yeah.
early rumor, release to end of
finish.
life. Yeah, and this happened the first time. I mean, before you were doing this professionally, I mean, we still kept track of the market. People overhyped when the first Titan came out by inflating the numbers Nvidia was giving them in their heads. It's just a thing that some people seem to do. Some people start to inflate performance for no reason, and some people are like, well, it's going to be barely any stronger. And I think that voice is like kind of dying to now. We're at a point where it's like the reasonable person is saying it's going to be 80% to 2 times stronger. It's like, yeah, that's because the math checks out at that point. And this 3x performance uplift, I don't understand where it could possibly come from, because that just doesn't, like you said in your video, like that just doesn't happen with modern silicon.
Yeah, this is like one node shrink, guys. This is going from Maxwell to Pascal was 2 full node shrinks worth of performance increases there. And what they got was like a 75% increase. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, the die size was a little smaller. They only upped power consumption a little bit to do it. But still, like, come on. Ampere added more ray tracing performance, so maybe that's why its die size had to go up more than like with Pascal and Maxwell, where they didn't add any of that stuff. So I don't know. And I just want to say this too. I just can't stop laughing here about this. Like with how many, and I put it in quotes because, and again, I'm not talking about a lot of the Twitter people, though some of them maybe. Like a lot of them I think are just following what they can. There's some supposed YouTube leakers who started at like 3x and now they're just slowly moving their goalpost to exactly what I've been saying for over a year. And I just want to tell you, it's not because the specs changed, guys. These designs take years. RDNA 3 and what it is now hasn't changed from basically how it was designed half a year ago. So anyone who's like, oh, it's toned down the specs, that doesn't make sense. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
These designs get locked in about a year ahead of time.
The only way I could imagine that something like that happening is if, for some reason, there was a die that they realized they couldn't manufacture at scale at the specs they wanted, so they don't release that die. Which
sure, that changed with RDNA 1. There was definitely a bigger RDNA 1 that they never made.
I think it would be pretty conspicuous when you see that, like it is with RDNA 1, where Navi 10 is pretty obviously a mid-range die.
Yeah, being like 30% smaller, or wait, technically it would be like 25% smaller than the Radeon 7.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what else to say about this. Like nothing, like I recently communicating some of RDNA 3's design is changing, and it's like, yeah, that doesn't come out for 1.5 to 2 years. Yes. Yes, that's way out. That's when they make last minute changes. But 5 months before release, guys, they don't change the whole architecture. That's not how this works. Lovelace's design was locked in months ago, and so was RDNA 3's. For sure.
Mm-hmm.
And also the same, I'll just throw this in there at the end. for Phoenix. Which I did think of this today talking to some people in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord. Phoenix is die size, according to what I know, is the same size, if not smaller than Rembrandt. It's one node shrink from 6 nanometer to 5 nanometer. How do you double performance with one node shrink at same power consumption on a smaller die that's still hamstrung by dual channel LPDDR5 memory? I honestly don't know where some of these fake leakers get off. It's so fundamentally doesn't follow common sense that it is egregiously bad, some of these leaks. I don't know. It's absurd what's going on. I actually think I might have to do a Phoenix leak soon. Well, it's officially spring, which for me and my dog Reese means getting outside and growing some fresh food in our garden. And also, it means having to mow the lawn every week, having to take care of weeds, and just having to maintain the yard in general, which means that, yeah, during the spring and summer months, I like having a quick snack that I can make so I waste as little time as possible now that I'm spending more time taking care of my yard. But I also, of course, want it to be healthy and tasty, and, well, yeah, that's where Vite Ramen comes in. Vite Ramen is an American company that, just like me, likes using fresh ingredients to make meals tasty and healthy. And it only takes a few minutes to make, and they keep updating their recipe, like the V3 edition of beef pho recently, to keep ensuring their product is as good as it can be. So make sure, even if you bought them before, you check back at their store. And if you do, click on the link in the description and use the offer code BrokenSilicon to save 10% on a special bundle just for Moore's Law is Dead fans. That gives you $25 in free goodies, and it really does help support this channel tremendously. Seriously, I eat Vite Ramen. It's tasty, it's healthy, it's fresh, and it's especially reasonably priced if you use the Moore's Law is Dead deal. Try Vite Ramen today. All right, let us move on then. Spamton Neil writes in and he says, have you heard anything on Nvidia's chiplet options? I'm wondering if Ampere next is going to be MCM or not. If it isn't chiplet, will they be forced to just have two dies side by side like first gen EPYC? They may be in major trouble at the top end if they don't have chiplets ready very soon. I don't know why they would need to necessarily do that. Like, I don't know. Even if you look at how Sapphire Rapids is organized, you could argue they're kind of copying in a similar way to like what Zen 1 EPYC did, where it's 4 tiles near each other. Mm-hmm. But Zen 1 was more like 4 different chiplets a little far apart. Sapphire Rapids has 4 big tiles like directly connected together with as little space as possible for latency reasons. All of these companies tend to do things in a bit of a different way. I don't think Nvidia's just, I guess we'll see. Maybe they will, right? Maybe because AMD has been working on all of this stuff in such a deep way. AMD is, going to have their organization of their first multi-die GPU architecture be much more complex than what Apple did, where they just put 2 next to each other. Maybe NVIDIA will just put 2 next to each other for that reason. I don't know. But I don't know. I'm not sure how NVIDIA is going to do it, but I wouldn't assume they have to do it the same way AMD did the first time they did it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, my simple dumb person answer is I would expect MCM out from NVIDIA by whatever is after Lovelace or whatever is after that. But just because that's clearly where the market is moving, and NVIDIA will be the last one to do it, I think, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of putting multiple dies next to each other, let us move on to story number 4. Navi 31 and MI300 leaked by Moore's Law is Dead. A couple of weeks ago, Moore's Law is Dead leaked what he could, or Tom at Moore's Law is Dead leaked what he could confirm about both Navi 31 and MI300. In summary, Navi 31 and Navi 32 are 100% confirmed to be using multiple dies. This is then going to be divided between 6 nanometer IO and cache dies, and 5 nanometer graphics or compute dies. Performance is expected to roughly double RDNA 2 performance, with only modest power consumption increases for most of the stack. PCIe 5.0 is all but confirmed, and 3D stacking is heavily suggested so far for Navi 31. Navi 31 will launch in Q3 or Q4 of this year, with Navi 32 following the first half of next year in 2023. More interestingly, at least in how elaborate it is, MI300, or at least the variant we have seen, is incredibly complex. It sees a massive, roughly 2,750 millimeter squared interposer hold above it 4 6-nanometer base tiles, and then above those, on each one, 2 5-nanometer compute tiles for 8 compute tiles total. These tiles see 20,000 connections between each of them to each other, double what Apple is using for the M1 Ultra. And I think there actually may be several 20,000 connectors for the 6-nanometer tiles to the other 6-nanometer tiles. Power consumption is currently targeting 600 watts, which sounds high, but must be noted is about 15% less than what Hopper offers while using 3 times the silicon. The 5-nanometer compute dies can also be swapped between various types of compute depending on the customer. And I'm not going to say the number. I was advised by Carbon Cry not to because, if we don't really know what they're doing with the compute units in these tiles, then it might be wrong to assume they're what we think they are. But based on what I've seen, these compute tiles can have way more compute units on a 110 millimeter squared die, which is the 5-nanometer dies I've seen, than you would expect. But it's worth mentioning, you might not need to put any L3 on it. You could just put L3 cache on the 6-nanometer tile directly below where the 5-nanometer goes. So you could remove a massive amount of cache. You could also, because there's multiple types of compute tiles, make these tiles only for like FP32, stripping out all the other operations they need to do. And so you could see a situation where, in terms of compute density, AMD offers hilarious amounts of performance depending on the SKU you configure, like kind of ordering a hamburger. Like, I want this type of meat, not that type. And yeah, all this is expected to launch in the first half of 2023 to directly compete with Hopper, which must be pointed out. Hopper may look impressive right now, but the MI250X launched at the end of last year. Hopper won't be out till Q3. In many ways, Hopper is just going to be competing with MI300. It again has 3 times the silicon per SoC, which is just insane. So, Navi 31, MI300. What do you think, Dan?
Well, with MI300, like that's why Nvidia probably needs to go to a tile-based approach at some point. I think this is more than what is possible to really do with a monolithic die. Where, well, what they have, so that's a total of 12 tiles, correct?
Yes.
That's a lot of silicon that I don't think you could print monolithically without, I don't know, having an insanely high failure rate.
Well, you would have to do the kind of like, whatever it is, like the stitching they do together of several reticle limit dies, like Cerebras does with that like wafer scale die. And that has its own performance losses for certain applications when you do that. And I just want to be clear, like 340 times 4 plus 110 times 8. So yeah, that's 2,240 millimeter squared total.
That's big.
Yeah, and so it's going to be around that ballpark. That's triple the 711 millimeter squared of Hopper. So I don't know how Hopper competes with this. If this variant I've seen really does come out, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Hopper's also probably going to beat this to the market by some amount of time, so they'll have that advantage for presumably several months, I think, right? Like, maybe I'm wrong, but this sounds like a March product launch, probably something like that.
Next year?
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
Okay, so Hopper will probably be on the market for a little bit before this comes out, at least.
Yes, but even the Grace Hopper combined thing won't be out till like mid to late 2023. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, we'll see.
And the reason I put these leaks together is what I've been doing with Navi 31. What I've been doing with all my leaks really is I'm just kind of done. Like, I want to leak things when I have multiple sources that I'm 100% sure of saying the same thing, and it's all together. There's some amount of connecting the dots in any leak, of course, but I don't see the point in leaking every spec of Navi 31 until I'm 100% sure and I can make sense of it. Like, I can say, well, this many stream processors has been increased per work group because it does this because they can clock it this high and it's going to get this type of per compute unit performance increase. Like, I don't see the point in doing that because, again, if someone were to have leaked Ampere's CUDA core count early, everyone would have thought, well, it must be at least triple the performance of of Turing. So
they did a very good job of not letting that get out on
again,
Ampere.
with Ampere, AIBs had to remanufacture some boxes. That was hilarious. The day of the announcement of Ampere, I was told incorrect specs from someone who 100% was just being told the wrong info by Nvidia to mess with people. So yeah, I agree. They did a good job, but it's because they literally lied to their partners. Although to be fair to Nvidia, they lied to their partners because their partners are always freaking leaking everything they tell them. So it can be understood why Nvidia did that. But so while I don't want to 100% confirm the configuration and specs of Navi 31 yet, I do. Although I confirmed like half of them, I did want to combine it with the MI300 that I have pictures of, because that at least tells you what AMD's capable of, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that right there tells you what they're probably thinking of doing with, like, I don't know, RDNA 4, which I hear RDNA 4 may either be getting dumbed down right now or just pushed to the next level. And man, I really do wonder I'll just say it. I do wonder if they could share some of these tiles with RDNA 4 and MI300. It'd be fascinating if they shared, and why would they not? They shared components between EPYC and Ryzen. Why not share components between MI300 and RDNA 4? It's just common sense.
And if their goal with ZEN to a huge degree was obviously being able to share parts between vastly different products and vastly different segments in the market, it would make sense that they would try to do the same for GPUs. But, you know, I wouldn't bet money on that right now. That wouldn't surprise me, though.
Yeah, and the thing I want to point out, too, is I thought to myself, like, when I started hearing that AMD was maybe playing around with putting in some RDNA 4 tiles on MI300 base dies, I asked one of my rendering people to kind of, like, see, well, would this, like, and this is huge, this 2,750 millimeter squared interposer, which is 4 times reticle limit, like, will this fit on a PCIe card? The answer is yes. It probably could, actually. It'd be really expensive, but you can just barely fit it on a fat PCIe card. So but I just have to think they would stop at 2 tiles with 4 compute dies, don't you think?
Yes, because
with 4 stacks of HBM3, isn't that where you would expect AMD to stop for a consumer gaming product? Well, and I guess we also don't know if there is some pretty big diminishing returns in gaming performance adding that many tiles together. Maybe there is, maybe there's not, but even if it's seen as one GPU by professional apps, they still might use the resources better if they're spread out than a game would.
Yeah, I mean, geez. I guess if they say it's possible, it's possible. That I would need to do. I'll believe them, but that sounds like it would be really squeezing the limits of what you can fit on a PCB that you could put in a desktop.
Not to mention the cost. I mean, I looked at, like, usually people talk about how silicon isn't actually that expensive. Well, when you have 2,200 millimeters squared of it, it actually does become pretty expensive, especially when the compute tiles for RDNA 4 are certainly going to at least be 4 nanometer, if not 3. The original plan was 3 nanometer, by the way, guys, but that might change because there are issues. With that in mind, 3 nanometer is more expensive than, let's just say it is 5 nanometer, like a lot more expensive. So we're talking about like 800 millimeters square. If they use the full setup, like 800 millimeters squared or more of 3 nanometer silicon, plus like 1,000, like plus like 1,200 or something, 1,500 millimeters squared of 6 nanometer silicon. No, I mean, at that point, you're looking at like $1,000 at least in cost of just the silicon before we get into the packaging costs and the cost of, 8 stacks of HBM3. I mean, this is a graphics card that at cost might be $2,000 to $3,000. So that's the only thing I would say is if AMD did launch some RDNA 4 chip that looks like MI300, the top MI300, that's like a $6,000 graphics card. Although to be fair, for all we know, it might be 3 times, 4 times stronger than RDNA 3. And if they did that, they're like, yep, it's 10 grand. And you know what? It also is 10 times the performance of a 6900 XT or something.
It's called the It's called the R9. RX. We don't care anymore. You'll buy this.
There's a part of me that wishes they would do that though, just so they can top charts and be like, no one can argue anymore. Like Titan Volta moment on steroids. I don't know though. All that's. I want to be clear though. It's possible, guys. I just highly doubt AMD would actually decide to launch that product because I don't even know where you go from there for the next gen flagship.
Yeah, unless they launch something like as a flagship of flagships that they only upgrade every like 3 years or something.
And the next one would just look like Ponte Vecchio, just like 40 chiplets that costs 20 grand, but technically can do 16K 500 hertz gaming. I don't know. I'd love to see it even if I can't buy it, but let's get out of this wild speculation realm we're in here. Move on to a reader mail. QH Freddy writes in and he says, AMD's use of 3D stacking on RDNA 3 looks very impressive, but what's to say Nvidia doesn't have access to that? My answer to that is, and we can't rule it out. For all we know, Blackwell's 3D stacked multi-die and Nvidia's got it working. I hope it is because I think they need that to compete with RDNA 4. But AMD has had 3D, by the time RDNA 3 comes out, they'll have been using Vcache for almost a year on the 5800X 3D and certainly Milan X. And then AMD is using multiple dies on the MI250X right now. So I'm sorry, AMD has been doing this years before they even bring out the consumer thing, or at least a year before they bring out the consumer, or most of a year before they bring out the consumer thing. And Intel's done 3D stacking on Lakefield 3 years ago, and Ponte Vecchio comes out now. So that's why I can believe Battle Mage is going to be multiple dies and 3D stacked. Probably 3D stacked. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm almost 100% it's multiple dies. They'll have had Lakefield for like 4 years and Ponte Vecchio for a year. That's why I believe Intel can do it. And AMD will have products out before Intel did besides Lakefield. Where's NVIDIA's 3D stacked products before they bring it to something reasonably priced to consumers?
Yeah, and to put that more with like Vcache with AMD. I mean, we know they've been working on Vcache for a lot longer than that too. Like according to things they've said, we know Vcache has been around, just not in a product for a long time with them.
Yeah. So I don't know. Who's to say NVIDIA isn't going to bring this out? I just don't think they have it ready for Lovelace, and I am not sure they do for Blackwell, although it's heavily rumored they might. I want to see a consumer product that does this stuff. I mean, a professional or server grade, $30,000 a product do this before I believe they're bringing it to you for $500. That's why.
Yeah,
because I think it's very unlikely that happens. Kronos writes in, will the widespread use of advanced packaging and various chips help drive down the cost of HBM? How much longer can GDDR scale before it becomes too power hungry? Do you think some form of HBM will eventually return to consumer products, or will something else replace GDDR? Yeah, I think HBM is going to come to consumer products again at some point, but I have to say that GDDR RAM isn't power hungry with RDNA 2, is it? As far as we can tell, Navi 33 is going to bring Navi 21 performance to 200 watts using GDR6, standard GDR6. So not all companies are letting traditional RAM drive their power consumption to the moon. And so I think it's going to, I already know GDDR7 is coming. It was planned for RDNA 4. Lovelace supposedly has some low-level support for it. I think that means so then 100% GDDR7 is coming. I think GDDR8 is coming as well. I think we need a fundamental change in memory, but it's not going to just be like HBM. I think it's going to be some other migration of cache or something else, and HBM is just going to be there for high-end products. I don't know. I don't think GDDR is going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. HBM rears its head every once in a while, and it's just, you get the odd HBM product, but yeah, it doesn't seem like GDR is changing anytime soon. And if we go all the way through to GDDR, that's probably going to be another 4 years at least with GDDR.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I'll continue to say that I'm a little surprised Nvidia isn't putting HBM on their flagship cards, but they're not. And if they're not, I don't know. I don't
Mm-hmm.
see HBM being on a lot of mainstream products for a while, and I think GDR is here to stay for the foreseeable future. All right, let us move on now to something else coming in the foreseeable future. And story number 5. AMD promises extreme gaming laptops in 2023 with Dragon Range CPU and Phoenix. Quoting from The Verge, AMD is setting its sights higher than mid-range gaming machines. It just revealed it's building a new CPU aimed at the pinnacle of gaming performance with the highest core thread and cache ever on laptops. The new CPU line is codenamed Dragon Range, and they'll live exclusively at the 55-watt TDP and up, enough power that they'll largely exist in the space where gaming laptops are plugged in the majority of the time, says AMD Director of Technical Marketing Robert Halleck. AMD says that the Dragon Range will take up the HX suffix for CPUs, a tier above the Ryzen 9 4900HS that impressed us at 35 watts in the 2020 Asus Zephyrus, but hinted that we shouldn't take the higher TDP as a sign they'll totally be ditching power efficiency for performance. They're estimated to be notably more power efficient than other laptops in the competing time frame, says Halleck. And those competing laptops, by the way, everybody, will be the Alder Lake HX that we'll cover a little bit later in this episode. That is, to my knowledge, basically the same thing as Dragon Range. Dragon Range finding a way to put Raphael's Zen 4 desktop into a smaller package. So 16 cores, probably like 4 compute units, and putting it onto one smaller with a smaller PCH and I/O controller to fit in a laptop at 55 watts, just like Intel is doing with their basically just shrinking i9-12900K performance to a laptop as well ahead of time. But anyways, continuing the write-up here from The Verge. Meanwhile, the 35 to 45 watt Phoenix line is aimed at machines thinner than that same mark. Both are part of the same AMD Ryzen 7000 series based on the same Zen 4 architecture, and unfortunately, it appears both won't arrive in 2023. So I just see this is exciting. I mean, frankly, we've already known about what I called Raphael H. Now they're calling Dragon Range and Phoenix for a while. None of this is technically news if you follow leaker circles, or at least follow us. But AMD officially confirming this stuff, I think, is kind of exciting. And I have to just point this out. So Phoenix, unlike what other people said, is not coming out this year. It's coming out next year, and it's in the 35 to 45 watt range using dual channel LPDDR5 officially. Again, this is not remotely close to 3060 performance, people. This is clearly a standard but good upgrade, just like Rembrandt was over Cezanne. That's it. That's what this is. That's what Phoenix is. And again, I think I need to do a Phoenix leak sooner rather than later, just like I did a Warhol debunking video when the community just started running wild with bad info.
Yeah.
I don't know, though, Dan. I'm sorry. Go on.
No, I mean, I think the AMD laptop stuff is also kind of where you see where you can see some running wild with speculation, because people want an APU that's low to mid-range in performance, and I just don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we'll be there next generation at the mid-range. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe it'll be licking the heels of okay, low-end performance with Phoenix, but Phoenix and Dragon Range, I guess. But I guess this also, more than anything, just confirms that the notion that, they're going to bring 16 core to to laptops in the near future. Well, not near future. 6 months from now. 6 to 7 months from now.
Well, Dragon Range will bring 16 cores, though.
Yeah, that confirms the notion that they're going to do that at some point, where they've been content to just remain at 8 cores for a while, because that's all most people need in laptops, really.
And it's an efficient way of doing this too. I mean, I think I've leaked it, and other executable fix probably leaked it first or something over a year ago, that Raphael has a small integrated graphics unit on at least a lot of the models. And if you're doing that, then just take the chiplets that you're using for desktop on AM5, put them in a tighter package, and there's your high-end laptop competitor. Which, again, any laptop with a 16-core CPU will have dedicated graphics, so just giving it 4 compute units is fine. And
I question to some extent if it really needs the integrated on it at all, but
Well, yeah, I think it's just because it takes up at this point on 5 and 6 nanometers so little space to put 4 compute units. Why not? You know, for
Yeah.
various reasons, including helping with like accelerating encoding, like how Intel uses their integrated graphics to accelerate encoding through their CPU cores. That type of stuff makes sense. And again, just like if you can put it in there so you have that backup graphics to compete directly with Intel, which is all they're doing with Dragon Range, directly competing with Alder Lake HX. Um, and yeah, I mean, as for Phoenix, it's like we just need to point out here that the reason AMD would make a super APU is if a customer like Apple wanted that or Surface. But as far as we can tell, Microsoft screwed over AMD in Surface deals like 3 gens in a row. So I don't see that happening. And like Van Gogh, I believe, was supposed to be a God, was it really that? I think Van Gogh was supposed to be a 2020 flagship APU for the Surface line. Never got used. Valve said they would use it after all the work was done, and AMD's like, I guess, sure, you can use it. After that, after that happened, I don't see AMD making some super gaming APU, unless, a specific customer wants it. And so when you look at Phoenix, it's like, yeah, you can expect probably like a 40 to 60% graphics increase, which should put it about a 6400, 6500 XT. But we're not talking about a 1660 Ti, 2060, or 3060 for that matter.
Yeah, that's maybe we'll get that on Zen 5 APUs. Maybe, but I'm saying keep in mind the 3060 will be pretty low end by that point. But
yeah, it's just AMD's got to decide they want to do it. Bfish36 writes in and he says, a few laptop related questions since we're almost a third of the way through the current life cycle. I understand that Intel's E-cores, the efficiency is space efficiency, not just about power, as many initially thought, with Intel's Big Little seeming to scale worse at lower wattages compared to Rembrandt. Are they going to fix this with Meteor Lake? Well, I think a big reason that's happening is it is both the first time they've done Big Little, so I wouldn't expect it to be perfect. But also, they're using 10 nanometer, guys. Like, they're at a no disadvantage compared to AMD on 6 nanometer. Not a giant disadvantage, but a small one. So just remember that that's probably a big part of it. But he goes, are they going to increase the iGPU CU count? Will AMD increase CUs in Phoenix? Well, we've already talked that to death. Will they start an integrated graphics ARM race next year? Adore TV's Arrow Lake rumors got me thinking of the midpoint between Arrow Lake launching in 2024. Lastly, any insight on the holdup of the supply chain with AMD laptops? We've seen a few models of the Asus G14 and maybe a Razer Blade 14, and that's it. It seems unusual even compared to last year at a similar time. AMD is making as many APUs as they can, guys. They can't make enough of them and keep them in stock. So it's a good issue to have, but it is an issue they're trying to work on and getting more and more and more volume out of TSMC. But otherwise, I think that's really all I can say. Will there be an integrated graphics arms race next year? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think Meteor Lake, if I remember right, is 192 execution units. So they're like, they're doubling the execution units from Alder Lake. And so what is that? If Alder Lake was about a 1050 in performance, a little weaker than that, doubling that gets you to about 1650. AMD will get a little stronger than that. Is that an arms race? 1650 versus 1660 performance? If 1660, by the way. It's just what we should expect out of a 2023 APU.
To me, it kind of just sounds like there's always this thought that the APUs will take over the entry level, and I do think they are, and I think it's slowly happening. But every time a new generation of integrated comes out, we're hoping it's going to be the entry level of this generation, of the current GPU generation, that it will match performance with, and it's always the entry level of the previous generation or two. You know what I mean? Where, I guess it'll be up to like 1650 performance, but it's not going to be at 2060 or 3050 or like 3060 performance, because APUs just don't progress that fast.
Or at least there's no evidence they're like they keep making these sub 200 millimeter squared APUs.
Yeah.
There's no evidence they're like pushing it to the limits of like 270 millimeter squared and like going to 32 compute units on, I don't know, 5 nanometer or something, because they're just not. Don't know what to tell you guys. And I think when people see things like, yeah, you know, they see Meteor like with 192 compute units, and they're like, that'll beat a 1650 or something. And it's like, isn't that exciting? Oh, and then Arrow Lake could bring 384 compute units, or execution units, I should say, same thing, really. And, you know, that's going to allow Intel to bring you something. Yeah, like Arrow Lake could be, you know, that's when we're getting to, okay, Arrow Lake could be close to a 3060. I think people hear that and go, oh my God, an APU arms race. And I'm like, yeah, that's in 2024. So what we're saying is Intel is bringing 50 to 100% more APU performance with Meteor Lake over Alder Lake. Yeah, but that's a year later, and Alder Lake is like 10 to 20% better than Tiger Lake. So it's way overdue. Just like Rembrandt's performance increase was way overdue, and Cezanne didn't like move the needle at all over Renoir. And then you look at Arrow Lake, double that performance at most, and it's like, yes, it's coming out a year after Meteor Lake. This is to be expected, but it's not impressive to me unless Arrow Lake was coming out this year. It's not, though. And so I don't really see it as a arms race so much as maybe slightly better than expected in performance increases in APU year over year, but that just makes sense to do this and push NVIDIA out of the low end if they can.
Yeah, this forces the NVIDIA out of the low end, like you said, and these integrated have just never quite been what people want them to be, but they're getting slightly closer to what we want them to. People always want them to be.
But let me be very clear about that, too. If AMD wanted to, in 2023, sure, they could launch a 4 nanometer APU with 32 compute units, like 32 megabytes of infinity cache, and probably give you something around a 6600 XT, maybe even a 6700 XT by then, if they pushed it to like a 300 millimeter squared, you know, buck wild APU. But if they do that, that's not Phoenix. It's something else they're working on, and it's up to them to do that. And so far, we've seen zero evidence they want to. Let us move on then to story number 6. Intel 24-core and 112-core Fishhawk Falls platforms leaked by Moore's Law is dead. Here's the write-up. On May 6th, Moore's Law is dead leaked some rather exciting info. Intel was getting back into HEDT, even if they don't want you to call it HEDT. In summary, Fishhawk Falls platform, launching in 3 to 6 months from right now, consists of the following. One platform called Mainstream Workstation, supporting up to 24 cores on a monolithic Sapphire Rapids Xeon-W die. These cores will all be Golden Cove, all big cores boosting to 4.6 to 5.3 gigahertz clock speeds with 300 to 400 watts of power consumption, 4-channel DDR5 memory, thank God finally, they didn't used to do this, with ECC support, and 64 lanes of PCIe Gen 5, and also probably aggressive pricing. Above that will be the Expert Workstation platform, allowing 112 cores with 2 sockets filled with XCC Extreme Core Count dies, an 8-channel DDR5 memory with ECC support, and an insane 112 PCIe Gen 5 lanes. Now, this will also support upgrades, at least as of now, for Emerald Rapids-based drop-in products, thus suggesting Intel could bring a 24 to 30 core medium core count die with higher IPC and clock speeds the following year for the mainstream one, and then up to 64 cores times 2, so 128 cores in dual sockets the following year for the Expert Workstation. And, well, I guess here's what I will say about this in conclusion. AMD definitely has server performance and efficiency on lock for the next few years, and therefore they can have HEDT on lock if they want to, but they're going to need a want to keep HEDT as the best platform they dominate moving forward. Intel is clearly willing to brute force their way into directly competing with a 96-core Zen 4 platform, even if they have to put 2 sockets on a motherboard, and their 24-core monolithic medium core count die should be very cost competitive against Zen 4 Threadripper. Now, before I get your thoughts, Dan, I actually do need to elaborate on this because there's been a decent amount of comments in my Fishhawk Falls leak about people being confused how the 24-core MCC die is going to be more cost or going to be cheaper than the Sapphire Rapids multi-tile or the Zen 4 one, because I've done so many videos talking about the economics of chiplets. Guys, here's how that 24 core is cheaper. Is 450 to 550 millimeters squared of 10 nanometer silicon. The XCC Sapphire Rapids one is 1600 millimeters squared of 10 nanometer silicon, and 96 core Genoa is about 1,000 millimeters squared of 5 nanometer silicon plus another 6 nanometer die. So even a 32 core Zen 4 Threadripper would consist of a similar amount of silicon to the MCC Sapphire Rapids, and then add on top of that packaging costs and the fact that TSMC is charging an arm and a leg for their 5 nanometer, whereas Intel owns their 10 nanometer nodes. So I'm sorry, guys. I don't know. Not all chiplet designs are cheaper than all monolithic designs. Like, Alder Lake probably costs less to make than Zen 3, just so everyone knows. Why would it not?
I mean, I think the notion would be it's the fact that there's failure rate is probably slightly lower per chiplet. Lower per chiplet because you're distributing that potential error across 3 chiplets instead of 1. But
they're keeping the i9 12900KS that boosts to what, 5.5 gigahertz in stock. I think the yields are pretty good on 10 nanometer now, guys.
Probably, yeah.
So no, I just thought that was very curious. The amount of people, like, it couldn't be cheaper. It's cheaper because it's smaller, guys. That's not necessarily better, but this is where monolithic designs make sense. When you're below 500 millimeters squared and you're getting good yields, this 24 core will be cheaper to make probably than a Genoa 32 core, which is probably the smallest they go down to for Threadripper for Genoa.
And that'll be pretty good for a quote-unquote poor man's HEDT.
Yeah, a poor man's 32-core HEDT. And again, guys, Navi 33 is monolithic because it's cheaper at that size to just make Navi 33 monolithic instead of 3D stacking it. But I don't know. What do you think about Fishhawk Falls?
So there's something curious to me. Like, is the reason they want both Intel and AMD are kind of have this drive to kill HEDT because it's just another platform they need to support, or?
That's definitely part of it, I think. And I think they see no point. Again, this really needs to be pointed out. When Intel was launching a decade of quad cores, their server chips were up to like 22 cores or more, depending on the year. It was like 16, then 18, then 20, then 22 or something. So if you think about Broadwell, so they had, I think they had 22 core Broadwells and for Xeon, and then they had quad core Broadwells. Yeah, they gave you 10 cores because that's not even half of what they could give you. That is firmly in the middle. That makes sense. That's when HEDT made sense. And then AMD brought out Threadripper because it cost them very little to launch that platform. And again, 8 cores is nice, but there were already people after a decade of just 4 cores going, I want more than 8. And so they did that because they had an opportunity to really give Intel a black eye. But at this point, their desktop goes up to 16 cores and supports like 10 SSDs and like 128 gigabytes of RAM. Even some X570 platforms have support for ECC memory. So why is 64 cores really HEDT? It's just server, but they're selling it for less for some reason.
I guess that's true. And if they can keep delivering a large number of PCIe lanes, or keep expanding the number of PCIe lanes there in the mainstream desktop, I guess I could see them just completely eliminating like Threadripper at a certain point. But
well, at least Threadripper non-pro, and that's another thing to point out as well. Like, Intel was only giving you like 16 PCIe lanes. Interestingly enough, Bulldozer and Piledriver actually gave you 32 PCIe lanes, which was awesome. But since then, these companies give you like 16 to 24 PCIe lanes. So yeah, giving you 64 would be nice. Or like when the Broadwell E gave you 28 3.0 or even more than 28, I believe it went up to like 44 depending on the SKU. There was a move for that, but otherwise it's like, I think that's why they're killing it off, because they don't see a point. But now I'm not so sure they will anymore, because I do know 96 core Threadripper is coming, which I thought it was funny. Video Cards' article based on this leak I did was Moore's Law is Dead confirms 96-core Threadripper. And I'm like, is that news? It's just Epic, dude, with a different name.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could just keep it at 64 cores, but we already know 96 is coming. I don't think that's a shocker, unless I guess the argument is they would want to keep Threadripper somewhat differentiated from Epic, which to an extent it's not, but
Yeah, exactly. And that's why up until now they've only brought out a Zen 3 Threadripper Pro, because they just don't see the point in launching anything for standard Threadripper. I mean, when Intel's not competing with them at all, and when they're like, I mean, again, guys, remember HEDT processors used to be $1,000. Then Intel went crazy with Broadwell and charged $1,700. Now AMD's charging $5,000 for Threadrippers. Is that really the price of an HEDT? These are workstation. I would argue it's already just workstation. Like one of my Intel sources I talked to about Threadripper, and he's like, first of all, I know they call Threadripper HEDT, but in my books, a 64 PCIe lane, 64 core setup is a workstation in name. Like this is
because I mean part of me wonders like just the 112 PCIe lanes. I just don't even know how you could use all of those, but
a lot of adding cards for like the fastest SSDs, a sound card, and like just different types of compute and like networking cards you could put in there. Like some of these big like EATX systems have like 5 cards in there. Like that's when you do that. Although again, 16, 32, 48. Yeah, I still
64 is probably enough for most, but I guess 64 you could.
But then you have NVMe drives, maybe.
Yeah, you might be brushing it up against it for certain uses at 64.
Mm-hmm. Brett Summers writes in, and he says, in regards to your Fishhawk Falls HEDT / mainstream workstation leak, for 24 big cores for gamers and creators, it got me thinking, do you think AMD will respond with the rumored 24-core Zen 4 variant for consumer AM5, or do you think their response would be purely aimed at the HEDT mainstream workstation platform only? I would say anything's possible, but remember, like, even if Intel is planning to compete with a 24-core Zen 4, which they are, internally Intel's like, we should just assume they're going to have that. All info I get is that AMD's focusing on just 16 cores again with maximum IPC and clock speeds, which I think is the right choice. Now, of course, they could still launch a 32-core Zen 4C as an option, which I think is the better option than trying to get 24 cores. I think just take the CCDs Bergamo uses and put 32 cores in there, because if you want more than 16, I'd figure you want the most you can get, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But as far as I can tell, what AMD's likely to do is just keep it to 16 cores, maybe have a special edition higher core count for AM5 at some point. And, well, I say at some point, I mean Zen 4 AM5 at some point, because obviously Zen 5 will go above that. And then just bring out Threadripper when they need to. I think that's what the logical thing for them to do would be.
Yeah, because I suppose I don't know what the 24 core will end up costing, but I imagine it's not going to be cheap. So I don't know. I don't know
from Intel.
Yeah.
Well, people point this out too.
I'm not saying I think it's going to be $5,000, but I think it's still going to be like in the $1,000 to $2,000 range, right?
I think $1,000 to $2,000, because the 10980XE was an 18-core they sold for $1,000.
Yeah.
So who's to say they don't sell a 24-core for $1,200 or $1,500? I think it's very likely they do. And with it being clocked so much faster than Threadripper, I think it competes with a 32-core Threadripper. Frankly, they need to. They need to make a splash in the space. And again, if they were charging $1,000 for Cascade Lake X, that was 18 cores. I don't see why they wouldn't just charge $1,500 for the 24-core. Now, the real question for me is what they charge for the 56-core Sapphire Rapids. That thing looks crazy expensive to make. It has all of these extra like AI accelerators on the tiles too. I don't know. When I look at that, I go, are they actually going to try to compete directly with Threadripper? Because I don't know what AMD is going to price Zen 4 Threadripper at. But if they're charging $5,000 for a 64-core, I think it's conceivable they charge at least $6,000 for 96 cores.
Mm-hmm.
And they do like, $4,000 for 64, $3,000 for 32, $2,000 for 20. Actually, I think they'll start at 32. But maybe not. Maybe they just put 96 cores at $5,000. That'd be crazy. I don't think they're going to, though. So then what does Intel do? Do they charge $5,000 for their 56 core? They could. It'd be justified. Or do they charge like $3,500 and say, hey, you can get 96 cores from them for $6-7 grand. Guess what? Two of ours together cost a pretty similar amount. Now you get 112 cores. That's the real question for me. Now, of course, they'd also go, and yes, we're using double the energy because you have 2 sockets. But still, I would like to see them try to brute force their way into making sure AMD can't charge $8,000 for 96 cores. Because if Intel's a little aggressive, then they're like, all right, we can't milk too much. Elusivity writes in and he says, do you have any details on B650 and the X670/690 chipset I/O that you can share, aside from ASMedia making them and the 670 or maybe 690, I don't know, being a pairing of 2 B650s on the same package or across the motherboard? From the Gigabyte leak, Raphael comes in with 20 PCIe lanes, which I think, sounds about right, 2 times USB 4, and 28 times PCIe total with no USB 4 for a Type 1 and 2 respectively. But is there anything you know and can share about the total number of additional PCIe lanes, like an USB 4 and 3.0 hanging off of the B650 chipset itself? I'm getting the feeling that the beefy PCIe layout on the high-end chiplet, coupled with DDR5 bandwidth and increased IPC from 16 or 24 cores Zen 4, would effectively invalidate the reason for having a mainstream Threadripper. Yeah, I would say look up whatever executable fix leaked a year ago, because I know 100% the documents and stuff he showed are legit. I eventually saw those same documents myself, so I'd look at that. But I would say that if they're going to like double that, then I think you're looking at in total like 40 PCIe lanes for the top configuration anyways. Yes, I don't see why they need to make Threadripper anything but workstation only moving forward with that type of an offering. I mean,
Yeah.
I know I wouldn't get Threadripper over that, especially if they launched a 24 core or something. I'm sorry, like that's what I go with.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess you're the type of person that this would be advertised to. I don't know. Yeah, it kind of just seems like the consumer Threadripper is a vanishingly small market with something like this on the market.
But at least now the top of the consumer line is becoming HEDT-like.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think, when it comes to gamer creators, HEDT-like is all they ever wanted. Most of these people did not need the top 10-core Broadwell E with like 40 or something PCIe lanes. They were like, can I just have more than 16? Can I have a few extra cores, a little extra memory, a few extra SSDs? I think we're going to get this covered in Raphael anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And MLID writes in, I don't know how to say your name there, my friend. He goes, hi, Tom. Regarding your latest HEDT video, do you have any timeline for when we could possibly expect Zen 4 Threadripper? Yes, I leaked the Threadripper roadmap a year ago. AMD was planning for Q2 2023. However, technically, they could launch a Zen 4 Threadripper Q4 if they wanted to. So it's up to them, but their original target was Q2 of next year. So I would definitely expect Fishhawk Falls by Q4. Expect a Zen 4 Threadripper by Q2 next year if you're planning ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Spamtham Neo writes in, given how many delays Intel has had in the past year, Sapphire Rapids, Arc, Ponte Vecchio, Arc again, have you heard anything about their node progress? Do you think they could actually hit their early 2024 product at 20 angstrom and later that same year to 18 angstrom? I don't want to get too excited for how fast they can catch up, but I get less and less confident in them as time goes on. Well, I think Intel 4, what they're calling Intel 4, their kind of 4-nanometer competitor, I think that is going to be ready next year, okay. But then that's 2023. Do I think they're going to catch up with 18 angstrom 1 year later? No, I don't. I can't promise you they won't, but if you put a gun up to my head right now, I go, no, I don't think they will.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think Intel still has an issue with delivering what they say they're going to deliver when they say they're going to deliver it. Yeah, like that's been an issue at Intel since Zen has been a thing pretty much. And I think Alder Lake gives us a glimpse into like that might start changing, but at the end of the day, that's still one really well executed product launch. Mm-hmm. And that's also while they're doing whatever they're doing with Arc.
Yeah. So again, it's like I see the roadmap. Seems like their 4 nanometers going fine, but no, I'd have to see it to believe it for them to leapfrog TSMC. in under 2 years from now, or I guess just 2 years from now. I just find it unlikely. We'll see, though. TSMC's having issues now. Spirit Song writes in, "Hi, Tom. One YouTuber today by the name of UFD Tech made a video in which he linked an article from Seeking Alpha, which is some investment. I'm aware of both Seeking Alpha and UFD Tech. Don't need you to explain." He goes, "What is interesting is, according to the writer of that Seeking Alpha article, he claims that he has been observing the woes of TSMC's efforts in shrinking beyond 5 nanometer and claims that TSMC has issues that are worse than what plagued Intel's 10 nanometer issues." I haven't heard that. And Intel is on track to have the node advantage over TSMC, or even already surpassing TSMC soon. How true is this in your opinion, and do you think TSMC can quickly rectify their node shrinking woes? I don't have a crystal ball. I think it's when you look at Intel's 10 nanometer woes, people went from expecting 10 nanometer to be ready in 2017 to thinking it would never come out, to now it's producing 5.5 gigahertz processors. So once it's either working or it's not, and once it's working, it's really working typically. So one thing I would say is I think a lot of people who have sources at one company tend to vastly underestimate their competitor because they don't have sources at the other company. I think you see a lot of this in like YouTube leaking channels that for some absurd reason only seem to have AMD leaks, and then they seem to always overestimate AMD because they have no clue what Intel and Nvidia are working on. And I don't know this guy, the Seeking Alpha thing. I don't know. So I can't judge what other sources he has. I'm completely just putting this idea out there just because I think it's worth mentioning. If he has a bunch of sources at Intel saying this is what's going on, does he also have those at TSMC to be sure of this? Or is he just like, oh, I'm confident in Intel, and but I don't really know what's going on with TSMC? Obviously he seems to have heard a few things. From what I've heard for like a year now, haven't I, Dan? I've been saying TSMC 3 nanometer seems to be having issues.
Yeah.
And then Daniel Nenny's confirmed that multiple times. I've never heard anything like this, though.
TSMC is inevitably going to run into issues. I don't think you or I have ever discussed they're having issues to the extent that Intel had issues with 10 nanometer, but there's going to be a point where TSMC slows down and Intel actually catches up, I think. I don't know if they'll outright leapfrog them, but 3 nanometer might be that point, yeah.
Yeah, so
where they catch up.
Yeah, I wouldn't ring the alarm bells that this is as bad as 10 nanometer just yet. And 5 nanometer came pretty quick after 7, so yeah. Let's just see. Flame writes in, and he says, "Hello, Tom. Yesterday, listening to Broken Silicon episode 151, you were discussing CPU single-core efficiency. This prompted me to do some digging, and I came across a relatively recent graph showing the performance gain over the last 16 years. What I like as far as input from you is really to talk about the curve of improvement. How underrated and big is AMD's Zen? They caught up to 9 years of Intel gains in just 3 releases. And to follow up with a question, do you see a point in the future where we see more of these linear 5% boosts? This is usually a good time to upgrade, as in 2017, you could probably make the case that the i7 2600K wasn't actually outdated 5 years later. Or would that be... It's actually like 6 years later. He says, or is it even more than that? He says, "Thank you. Love the content. Have a good one to all watching or reading." Yeah, I'm looking at the chart here. So your real question is Zen underrated? Yes. I've always thought it was. It's like even when they weren't winning in gaming, I was like going, guys, they're losing by like 20% with double the cores using the same energy. This is nuts. It's just so funny because it's like, it's like how people say Ampere is better than RDNA 2 on average. Well, they're mostly looking at 4K performance. In 1080p, it's a clean sweep with RDNA 2 pretty much over Ampere. I've actually found, I will say that in 1080, I just talked about how I tested the 6700 XT against the 3070 again. Yes, the 3070 wins pretty handily by like 10% or so in 4K compared to a 6700 XT. But in 1080p, there are a couple games where the 6700 XT blows the 3070 away. So I would say that was a similar situation with like Zen 1. I found it so hilarious how people were like, well, AMD's still behind Intel. It's like, yeah, like one application. Let's look at another one. I do think Zen 1 and Zen Plus, for that matter, are grossly underrated.
Oh, yeah, especially Zen 1. Zen 2, I think, or Zen Plus, I think the perceptions were starting to change, but it was still kind of it was still kind of seen as like, oh, it looks like AMD is on the rise, but I'm still going to get an Intel CPU at the end of the day.
I think the most impressive thing about Zen Plus was they managed to increase performance by like 7% year over year right away. And everyone thought Zen 1 was just going to be this blip. And it's like, no, Intel brings 5% increases. AMD just did 7 with like a half increase of architecture, not even a full.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you move to a completely new paradigm, you can expect there's going to be big changes for the next several years. Like
Pile Driver was like 25% better than Bulldozer.
Yeah, it was just Bulldozer was
Starting
just
from
worse
a pretty
than
low level. Yeah,
Bulldozer was just worse than Phenom.
Real low hanging fruit to fix. Like, you know, they just walked around like, hey, half this fruit's rotten. But sorry, I think I derailed your train of thought. What were you saying?
Oh, no, I didn't have much more to say to that. Just there was a perception with Zen 1 and 2, I think, that AMD was still the bargain, more of the bargain brand, even though they were a resurgent bargain brand. And then by Zen 2, I think it was like 40-60 people saying AMD was better versus people saying Intel was in a better spot. And by Zen 3, I think it's just... I think, at least in people that talk about it online, the mentality is completely flipped.
Yeah, to the point that we almost wonder if AMD is being given too much
credit.
Of the doubt.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, do I see a few years coming up with 5% boost? Absolutely not. Zen 4 is going to be maybe not a Zen 2 moment, but certainly bigger than Zen 3. It's going to be a bigger than Zen 3 moment. So in between, because remember, Zen 2 doubled core counts and increased single-threaded performance by like 20%. That was just crazy. Here, it's like a 0 to 50% core count increase and probably a 20 to 50% single-threaded increase. So we're in between. But I think Zen 5 is going to be maybe comparable to Zen 2 again. So that's just gen over gen. I mean, Zen 5 is going to be like, I don't know. What does that make it then? Like 3 times better, 4 times better than Zen 3. And I don't think Zen 6, I've already started leaking early details of Zen 6. Doesn't sound like a slouch. And I know that Raptor Lake is going to be at least like 30%, 40% better than Alder Lake, depending on the metrics. Some metrics will be 10 to 15%. But, you know, I think overall 30% better. And then you're going to look at Meteor Lake probably be 20 to 40% better than that. And then Arrow Lake probably be about 40% better than that. From both companies, everything I see is we're looking at well above double-digit gains every year and a half. And if that, I just mentioned like 3 generations, so that's like 4 or 5 years from now. So no, I think moving forward, upgrade when you need to, or when it becomes hilarious to not upgrade. Because it's almost getting to that point for some of my friends right now who have like a Broadwell system or something, where you have like the little cores on Alder Lake stronger than the 10 Broadwell E-cores he has or something. You know, so like when it but before it becomes absurd or you actually need it, everything coming is just going to be hilariously better. I don't see things, and I don't know what comes after Zen 6. I don't see anything slowing, because and then right around Zen 6 is when we're getting like Lunar Lake and another lake I'm aware of that comes after that I haven't leaked yet. I think we're good. We're good till like 2026, 2027, guys. Today's video is brought to you by CDKeyOffer.com. Now that I've got my compact Alder Lake benchmarking system done, I'm free to test a lot of graphics cards in both Windows 10 and Windows 11, and I always get those keys from CDKeyOffer.com. That's because it's a reliable, long-term sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead that gets you reasonable prices on legitimate keys for these types of products. But it's really not all that they offer. They also can give you keys for Microsoft Office, keys for PlayStation codes, and even some of the latest PC releases like Elden Ring, and they even carry gaming peripherals in chairs now. Whatever you need, CDK Offer probably has you covered, and they're always running sales, but make sure you use the best code possible, and that's the ones provided for the Moore's Law is Dead fans. Moore's Law is Dead fans get the biggest discount, and if you go to the link on screen or in the description. You can use code BrokenSilicon to get 25% off Microsoft products and Die Shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website. Using these codes really does help Moore's Law is Dead, and it helps you pay reasonable prices for games that you want and keys that, frankly, you just have to use half of the time. So, again, use the link in the description, use Broken Silicon, use Die Shrink depending on the products you're getting, and pay reasonable prices for keys today at cdkeyoffer.com. But speaking of those future architectures, let us talk a little bit about one of them in story number 7. Zen 6 Venice early details leak. On April 29th, I decided to spice up the end-of-month live stream by leaking early Zen 6 Epic details. In summary, Venice is the code name for Zen 6 Epic coming after Zen 5 Turin. It will bring core counts conservatively well above 200 cores, with room for 384 or 500 cores, honestly. A complete redesign of the L2 and L3 cache systems that is in Zen 4 and Zen 5, and HBM being heavily featured as core to the design. Current launch target is end of 2024 for select customers or early 2025. There you go, Dan. Zen 6. Venice, baby. What do you think?
Honestly, these core count, that's such a high core count. I don't even know really what to think of that. Like, that's certainly a lot of cores.
I know. Then you wonder if there's going to be like a Zen. Although right now, I can't confirm any Zen 6 C or D. I think they might just move into an entirely different paradigm by then. So who knows what they'll do if they do like an all little core architecture like Intel Sierra Forest.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. It's just exciting. I know enough information to know that Zen 6 is at least as big of a deal as Zen 3 was. You know, Zen 6 over Zen 5. So again, to answer the previous question, guys, nothing's going away here in terms of massive gains every year and a half. I mean, do you have anything else to add about this one?
No, not too much more. Just good to know. Good to know the more cores revolution isn't stopping for at least another, what would this be then? 4 years, I guess.
Well, yeah, when I started hearing some updated information recently, which I haven't leaked yet, about like Turin and where the core counts could already go, I'm like, when does this stop? Are we really going to like 1,000 cores with Zen 7 or Zen 6 or something? Like, when does this stop? Like, when does the customer say, hey, when we said we could keep scaling this software with as many cores as you throw at us, I guess that was a bit of hyperbole. It isn't scaling past 800 cores or something, you know? When does that happen? But everyone I ask says maybe around 1,000, but it's hard to say. That there are just some applications that can really, really benefit from ramping it up that much. I am Patty Cakes writes in, and he says, it's an inverse to the latest HEDT video. Not really gaming hardware related. I want to say that Intel has already proven that they can get a lot of work done in very little space with E-cores. Has there been any word if they're going to double down on E-cores in the server at some point? ARM is already starting to eat some of the server market with Ampere and AWS Graviton, just using the silicon more efficiently and not building things that rarely get used in their workloads like AVX 512. Do you see Intel having something like a 4P plus 128E core monstrosity at some point for Xeon, or is that just wishful thinking? Well, I think you're lowballing what it would be. It'd probably be like 8P plus like 800, you know, whatever, 96E or some craziness. I've heard of some designs that have stuff like this, but it's a little disputed among some of my sources when they might try something like that. And for the foreseeable future, it sounds like they're going, at least in server, probably with all big or all little. Sierra Forest, all little. And then, or at least almost all little, although I think it is all little. And then, you know, like Granite Rapids, just a ton of big cores. At least right now, the reason they would do that is this isn't a consumer platform. Like, this isn't like a consumer, oh, now I'm running this app in the background while gaming. This is a professional platform that always needs all big cores or always can use all little cores. That's why you'd focus on one or the other, probably. And the answer is yes, they are, though. All right, then. Let us move on to the wrap up. These are the stories that didn't get to become their own stories, but are definitely mentionables, which for the first time in, what, Dan, like few news episodes we actually have more than like 1 to 5 things. The wrap-ups have been boring, but I guess this is a pretty big episode actually for this cycle. RX 6400 is out, Dan, and it's 100% locked from overclocking. I don't know if you saw that. You can't overclock any. It's completely locked down.
I mean, that's unfortunate. Like, I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, I guess maybe you could overclock this to a 6500 XT. But
yeah, I think you could because it has the same bus, and it has maybe it has 25% less compute units, but it uses like 50 watts. There's no doubt you could have clocked that to like 3 gigahertz and nearly like been 90% of 6500 XT for 20% less while not needing a P. I think it's stupid though. Then that's what the 6500 XT should have been, or I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the days where you could overclock your card to 2 tiers above what you bought it for is it hasn't been around for a while. I don't like locking out overclocking completely though.
Yeah, I have nothing to say except for not a fan of this happening. Nvidia H100 priced at over $30,000 per card in Japan. Now, obviously, we don't know if this is going to be what the official pricing becomes, but I can kind of believe it.
What this is a thing like what a research lab buys one of, and yeah, when you're talking about stuff like that versus consumer stuff, it's such a completely different calculation. That like, yeah, 30,000 sounds in line with what you would expect for Hopper.
You know, this did remind me, though. Obviously, this is a really expensive product with an insane board. I mean, technically, it has 2 dies on the board. I think they like have a separate die for video output or something on there. I hope I'm not misquoting that, but if you look at the picture, so the H100 can just do compute stuff while another die can handle other things. So that's why it's so expensive on the one hand. But on the other hand, a lot of it is that it's like an insanely pushed, hard to cool 4 nanometer thing. One thing I forgot to mention about that Lovelace discussion we had is, I just want to be clear, what would change my mind about where Lovelace's performance could go is if it turned out it had like an 800 millimeter squared die. Then I go, oh wow, of course that'd be a bigger die than Hopper. Find that unlikely, but that would change my calculus a bit. Having said that, guys, you know how expensive 800 millimeter squared of 4 nanometers is going to be? It's like $300-$400 in silicon alone. Let me move on here. Intel node density confirmed. So Intel 4 brings double the node density of Intel 7. Oh, that is exciting.
I mean, the dumb brain math is like, well, that's about in line. I mean,
I guess to put a feather in the cap of a previous comment here, though, it is worth mentioning that Intel 4's density will be competitive, if not slightly better than TSMC 5 nanometer. So 4 nanometer, but of course by then their 4 nanometer will be out, I guess. Yeah. So, but I guess you could argue if Intel 4 works perfectly and comes out on time early next year, that it is actually almost caught up to TSMC's 4 nanometer. So they're getting close then.
Yeah, and if TSMC does have an issue on 3 nanometer, maybe Intel will.
I don't see them really beating TSMC so much as tying.
Yeah, or if they do end up pulling ahead of TSMC, it's not going to be like the advantage TSMC had against Intel a couple years ago.
Yeah. All right. So here we have Zen 3 announced for Chromebooks. Woo! I mean, I don't know what to tell you guys. It's just Cezanne, as far as I can see here, with Vega and Zen 3. This is not any other rumored die. This is... I don't know really what to say about this. Not much. Moving forward. Oh, Nvidia only paying $5.5 million for lying about the income from crypto sales. A lot of takes on this were just...
I'm sure people thought this was a perfectly reasonable amount, right, Tom?
Yeah, everyone's like, this is pocket change compared to the money they made lying to investors about where their income was coming from.
When stuff like this is proven about like lying to investors, maybe the punishment shouldn't be, I don't know, orders of magnitude less than what they made off of it.
Yeah, just to be clear here, if they sold an extra million cards, they had to pay an extra they paid $6 per card lot from this lie, which they sold more than an extra $1 million. So this is nothing. This was just cost of doing business stuff here.
Graphics cards famously cost $5.5.
Yeah, so this is double, right? Yeah. Digitime reports that Z4 could launch in Q3 next to Raptor Lake. So I don't have much to say about that, except that that's always been within the time frame of expectations. That's exciting if that happens. And again, my understanding is Zen 4 was always planning to come out by Q4, but that they could almost launch it now if they actually wanted to. It's just they want DDR5 to be ready, but maybe they'll pull it up even more. When I say ready, DDR5 prices to be much lower. But it'd be interesting if they just pulled it up even more, just so they can say they're out before Raptor Lake, which might be wise. Alder Lake HX specs leak out. I really don't have much to say to here on this one. They've got the i9 12900 and 950 HX. This is again putting desktop Alder Lake into a smaller SoC for laptops. I mean, what are we looking at here? 16 cores at 5 gigahertz with base clocks of 2.3 gigahertz because it's a mobile variant. I will say the one weird thing here is the i5 12450 HX. So 4 big core, 4 little core, calling it an i5. That's kind of odd.
Well, what do you mean? Do you think that should be called an i3?
I don't know.
No.
Why is it less than some? I don't know. I just find that interesting.
Yeah.
Do they really need to cut this down that much? I bet they don't make a lot of those. And then let's see. Intel buys Siri, a Finnish graphics IP competitor. I don't have much to add to that, except this is another example of I do not believe Intel is going to just cancel Alchemist and walk away. They clearly are in it for the long run, even if their feet get bloody running in this long run to make Intel graphics work well or be competitive. It might be a long road, but I see all evidence they're just building for a long fight long term. Intel confirmed Meteor Lake had powered on, which I thought was funny because I had already known 2 weeks ago they had powered on desktop Meteor Lake. And I did add that clarification on Twitter because Intel already announced Meteor Lake had powered on. I just want to be clear. Intel has now powered on desktop Meteor Lake, guys. And this was so surprising to some people on Twitter that followed me because they're like, some websites were like, wait, I thought Meteor Lake is mobile only. No, guys. Meteor Lake is a full generation launching less than a year after Raptor Lake to desktop with much higher IPC than Raptor Cove. It's going to be exciting, and it's on schedule, like I keep saying. LHR is fully bypassed by NiceHash. So I want to be clear about that. You don't have to download some weird thing. This is like a default mining program. Now 100% goes around LHR for NVIDIA graphics cards mining. So that LHR is gone.
I don't know if I've heard of. Is NiceHash a
yeah, that's like the most
Ether
popular one.
Okay, no surprise. Miners are going to figure out how to make their money.
Yeah, and a question people ask me from time to time that I don't know the answer to is, will Lovelace have LHR? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Activision shareholders greenlight acquisition by Microsoft. FTC investigation is starting to sound more and more serious. I don't know if you have anything to talk about on this really, Dan, but it does sound like that FTC inquiry into Microsoft buying Activision is becoming more and more like it might be blocked.
I mean, I haven't read any like new info or anything that I haven't talked about with you previously, or it just seems like the FTC is serious to go into the final one as well. They're also investigating the Sony acquisition of Bungie. Seems like the FTC is just getting somewhat serious about monopolistic practices in the gaming industry in general. I think the Microsoft one would be the more likely one to get
sure.
blocked, but it would be interesting if both of them got blocked.
Yeah, I've got to say, we already talked about this a lot when the news of when the news first came out of Microsoft buying Activision, then Sony buying Bungie. I just do not understand the people cheering for these types of stories. It's like, yay, more control over consumers. Yay, consolidation. From where I'm sitting, block all of it. I'm sick of these companies becoming bigger. Everything. Block every acquisition. That is like these people just we like what was it like in the show 30 Rock? Like there was like what was it like Heinz like what is Heinz Halliburton is a sensible acquisition, a sensible merging that allows synergy between ketchup and military contracts. It's just like this is just getting. This isn't that crazy, of course, but it's just like, do we really need a few entities to own everything?
Yes, we do.
I mean, the only thing I'll say is I do legitimately hope like Sony buys like Konami or something, because someone else needs to run that company and they have a lineage with that stuff. But besides things like that, I really just hope a lot of this gets blocked, because I am tired of this consolidation. It could lead to a very scary, overpriced world of like just ridiculous $200 per year required cable packages to play half of the games. It would suck.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Once again, we've talked about this before. Nothing good is going to happen to you for any of these acquisitions happening. It at best doesn't affect you.
Yeah,
really.
And at worst takes things away from other people or allows a company to jack up prices on something or have more control. It's not a net gain for the community, guys.
Yeah.
Let us move on, though. That is the rather lengthy wrap-up section compared to at least the previous few news episodes. Let us now get to the final reader mails. MCH writes in, on your point on SSD I/O unit changing rendering, not sure what that means. He says, here's something NX Gamer said on modulation in his Unreal Engine 5 demo video around the 1850 mark. He said, on modulation, PCs are just going to have to brute force it, so you're going to see a bigger demand on VRAM, just like we did last generation when I told everyone before it started, do not buy 2GB cards. 8GB cards are not going to cut it this generation, potentially 12 won't. And know that you're going to look at 16GB as a minimum soon, as it's unlikely that PCs will get standardized custom hardware for I/O processing like the consoles have. Do you expect VRAM requirements to raise sharply as developers try to brute force it on PC like NX Gamer suggested here? So I put a lot of thought into this question, actually, and here's what I'll say. Right now, I have no trouble running 4K even with ultra textures on my 8GB 3070 and the overwhelming majority of games. I'd say 10% of the games I play require turning down textures, and almost none of them require lower resolution that's noticeable. And I paid $600 over a year ago for this. I'm happy. Now, what happens near the end of this gen, we're going to have to see. But, let's say 4 years from now, I'm not going to be mad if I, for some reason, still have my 3070 and I can't run 4K Ultra. I won't be mad if that happens 2 years from now. This was a mid-range card from 2020. Why 4 years later would I be mad I have to turn down some settings? I won't. I'll probably have upgraded by then, and I'll have saved money by not buying a useless 3090 that didn't need 24 gigabytes of RAM. I think 10 gigabytes was an issue if you're spending like $1,000 like a lot of people did for a 3080. But you get what you pay for, and I don't know. Let's just say someone, and then I think anyone who buys a 3070 after this, they're going to be like used ones in a year from now on eBay for $250, just like 1070s became that price. So I don't know. I just also point out that the Xbox Series S has 10 gigabytes of RAM total. So brute forcing VRAM would be an 8GB card compared to a console almost only having that much total. So, and I assume if you pay like $250 for an 8GB 3070, you're okay with 1080p. I don't know. I don't expect VRAM requirements to raise sharply. Anyways, too, after this year, 8GB is definitely for 1440p or lower. But I don't know. I think eventually, yes, devs will require 16GB GPUs and 32GB of DDR5. But that alone there, 16 plus 32 is 3 times the RAM of the consoles. I think that's brute force right there. I don't think 16 gigabytes is going to be like a minimum anytime soon. I just don't. And again, even the games that require that, that's going to only be the games that make full use of, like, presumably we don't have proof of it yet besides kind of Ratchet and Clank. The only games that make full use of PS5 level asset streaming will require this anyways. Most games won't. Most games right now I play, guys, can fit all of 4K in 6 gigabytes, let alone 8. Like 55% of games don't even need 8 gigabytes actually.
The idea that they're going to have to brute force I/O by using the GPU's RAM, I think, probably will happen to some extent. I mean, if it needs to use the GPU's RAM to to stream assets onto it successfully, or to have that I/O successfully, then yeah, they're going to need to increase RAM usage. But on the other end of that coin, on the other side of that coin, I don't think game devs are going to suddenly switch to start having requirements for people that are going to have start having requirements that 90% of systems don't fulfill, because that would be stupid of them to do so. So maybe once we get to like mid-generation to late generation, maybe you'll start seeing 12 or 16 gig requirements, but I don't think you'll see that in 2024. Maybe 2025.
Not for 1080p.
Definitely not for 1080p. For like 4K, maybe 12 gigabytes for 1440p or something.
Yeah, and I think you have to remember that in the Unreal Engine 5 demos that have been shown off, they're very clear that like the more RAM, the faster SSD you have, the better you can do the asset streaming. And if you're in 1080p, the assets you stream in don't need to be as high of quality, because you cannot tell the difference if you don't have 4 times the pixels to see the difference between the textures. So I think the example I give holds true. The Xbox Series S has 10 gigabytes total. The PS5 is 16 gigabytes total. If you have an 8 gigabyte graphics card and 16 gigabytes of RAM, you have 50% more RAM than the PS4 and over double the Xbox Series S. That's probably enough to brute force asset streaming at 1080p. And any card with 8 gigabytes is probably going to be a 1080p card in a couple years for sure. Not right now, but for sure in a couple years. I don't think there's much to complain about that. If you have a card that is only 6 gigabytes in 2 years, well, what's going to happen is you'll get a lower frame rate, or the streamed in assets won't look as good. But you presumably have what then in 2 years? A $150 A380, or like, are you really complaining that you can't turn up the settings? I don't know. And in terms of like how much brute force will be required, I'm sorry, if you have 32 gigabytes plus 16, that's 48. That's triple the RAM of a PS5. That should be enough to kind of brute force a game. Most games are less than 40 gigabytes. So 16 gigs of VRAM, I don't know. I don't think, I don't know. I don't see that being a big thing in the short term. And again, it would only be for games that do that kind of asset streaming in the most aggressive ways. Brett Summers writes in, he says, "Hello, Tom and Daniel." Doesn't sound right when I use your full first name, does it? What do you think, Dan?
Well, I don't go by Daniel, so it doesn't sound right to me.
No. We don't appreciate that, Brett. But he says, "Hope you guys are doing well. I was just wondering if you had any information on how the market for DDR5 will be looking around Zen 4 or Raptor Lake's launch. I was planning on building a Zen 4 build, and a 5200 megahertz kit right now where I live is 280 to 320 Canadian dollars. These aren't blisteringly fast kits either, but man, a 5600 or 6000 megahertz one costs roughly 380 to 480 dollars Canadian. That's insane for 32 gigabytes. Yeah, it's a lot. Do you see these going down around that time? Any of your sources indicate this would be the case? I remember you saying do-it-yourself is getting scalped here compared to OEMs buying DDR5. You are, right? I talked to multiple OEMs and even some system integrators. OEMs pay 10 to like 15% more per gigabyte for DDR5 over DDR4. And even system integrators seem to pay about 25 to 35% more. So that's people who sell thousands of computers a month, not millions, and they're only paying like a 20 to 40% markup. So what do you think that means it should be? I think there's no doubt about it. Prices for DDR5 are likely to come down substantially near the end of this year. Will it still be more than DDR4? I think probably this year. I don't think we're near that inflection point yet where actually DDR4 starts to become more expensive because they don't make as much of it. That always happens eventually. Like DDR2 is crazy expensive right now.
I mean, I have to wonder. My guess would be most of the RAM being bought in the DIY community right now is still DDR4. So
Exactly.
I think it's and I don't think that's going to change until maybe next year. I don't know.
It'll start. You have to think of who's buying new, though. At the end of this year,
That's
most people
true.
buying new will probably want DDR5.
Yeah, that's true. So the inflection point, or it will start moving towards that inflection point next year, probably.
Well, and it can't be forgotten that a lot of this has to do with OEMs, where OEMs are also still mostly doing DDR4, but they will be doing mostly DDR5 at the end of this year. So, yeah, I think near the end of this year, you're going to see prices on DDR5 come down a lot. How much? I don't know. I would guess at the end of this year, DDR5 is going to be like 40% more than DDR4. But, that means that kit there that's like $320 Canadian, I don't know, it'll probably
Like
250, 200 or something instead, or probably less than that. I don't know. It's in Canadian funny money, so I don't even know what's going on anymore. Let me see here. 320 CAD to USD is $247 right now. So it's like double the price of DDR4. Yeah. So a $250 kit right now, I'm guessing will be like 160 at the end of this year. And then next year, it'll probably go down to about 100, and that's where everything's going to be a nice sweet spot. I keep saying, I think early next year is going to be a killer time to build.
You think 100 sound? Do you think 100 for 32 gigs or?
I mean, I got my 32 gigs of DDR4, and it was fast DDR4 for like, I don't know, 120 or something, 130 or something a few months ago.
I guess I always just thought it would probably stabilize maybe at like 140 to 160 for DDR5.
It could, but this comes from me thinking things have been more inflated for a very long time than most people realize. You have to remember that the DDR4 kit I'm using in my benchmarking system for Alder Lake, it's a 3200 megahertz kit that I overclocked to 3600 megahertz. I got it for $67 in 2016.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean,
so that's 6 years ago.
And RAM prices are always weird. They
fluctuate.
They fluctuate a ton. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, like, we've been going through a period where RAM's been worth a boatload, and I wouldn't surprise me if early 2023, after overproduction crashes, people going outside not wanting to game as much, we see a similar pricing crash in RAM prices that we saw in like 2015 and 2016. I'm not saying it will happen, but yeah, if it does, why can't DDR5 be the price I paid for RAM 6 years ago? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe I'm too optimistic, though. Frankenhaas writes in. He says, "Hi, Tom. I wonder if Alder Lake i7s and i9s are more competitive with the 5800 X30 in gaming, specifically when disabling the E-cores. This causes a big increase in ring frequency when you disable them, from 3.6 GHz to 4.6 GHz, without overclocking on a 12700K, for example, which is typically held back when E-cores are active. This also leaves the same number of P-cores as a 5800 X30 at higher clocks. I'll guess that the loss of E-cores wouldn't affect performance in gaming to any significant degree in current titles. After your conversation with Max of hardware numbers in the last Broken Silicon, about 1 and 0.1% frame times, I tried this. I disabled E-cores on my 12700KF, and it sure feels snappier in Battlefield 2042. I wonder if this would reduce the gap on some games where the 5800 XRD has an advantage. And if true, it might suggest that Alder Lake users should consider leaving the E-cores on for general use and disabling them when it's time to game hard. Oh, yeah, man, gaming so hard. Thanks for reading.
I mean, I don't think for most people I would recommend doing that just because that sounds annoying. You know what I mean? I think I would rather just leave E-cores on or off all the time. And whichever one gives me the net gain is what I choose to do.
Yeah, this reminds me of when I had an i7 4770K in college. And there were like some games, although Haswell really kind of started the perfection of hyper-threading delineation and like when you're running games. But still, like, I remember there were like a few games where the performance was 2 to 5% better with a 4770K if you disabled hyperthreading, but that some games there's a slight loss in performance, and also in any of my non-gaming apps there's a big loss. I did like Handbrake and stuff and other applications in college, so I don't know. I would say, can you quantify it? Are you sure there's a noticeable difference? If you are, disable them if you want to and you don't use it for anything else. But otherwise, I see it like hyperthreading 5 years ago. You're probably getting benefits from hyperthreading from time to time. Just leave it on. It doesn't make a difference in realistic frame rates. If it does, maybe turn it off then. Like it made sense sometimes with Sandy Bridge to do that. But I would advise most people just leave it turned on because it's not going to make a huge difference unless you're trying to game at 300 hertz.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway from Alder Lake generally is the E cores don't seem to do that much, and the P cores are the reason Alder Lake is so good is just because the P cores are really good, but there doesn't seem to be that big. There doesn't seem to be some massive detriment to having the E cores that I've seen anywhere.
I would say,
except for in some isolated instances.
I would say that it would be fair though for a benchmarking channel to try that out, simply because if you look at what Intel's charging for their processors, they're basically charging P core to P core. Like they charge $250 for a 6-core i5. It's like the same as what AMD's charging for a 5600X. And then you look at the i7, which goes for like $350. Yeah, they're charging less per P core than the 5800X 3D. So even if you were going to do that, it's not really priced badly. Intel's basically giving the E cores away for free. QH Freddy writes in, do you think Alder Lake could have trouble with PCIe 5.0 hardware because it releases before any PCIe 5.0 devices were validated on the market? I did look this up to remind myself. I guess Zen 2 did have Vega 20 and RDNA 1 out already before their launch. They did have plenty of stuff to test, but no, I don't really expect any issues. I mean, by the time PCIe 5.0 devices come out anyways, you're going to probably have BIOS updates if there were any issues. And they have 5.0 things they can do to test it. There are physical requirements for having a slot. That's why you see some even Z690 boards lack PCIe 5.0 because they didn't meet the standard. So there's something there they're testing to make sure it works. So overall, no, I don't think there's going to be any issues.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that, on that, baby. I think that's all we have here, Dan. This was a rather larger episode finally compared to the last few news ones. This is a big boy.
This is a pretty big guy for you.
I don't like how that sounds.
That's them quoting The Dark Knight. Rises.
It's a pretty big guy for you?
He says, you're a pretty big guy, and then Bane says, for you.
For you. It's interesting if you say that in a different voice. It sounds like you're talking about something entirely differently, Dan. Well, on that note, though, I think it's time for us to say goodbye. Remember, if you're listening to this, we cannot do this without our patrons. They got this episode early and ad-free. And they got Die Shrink that just came out as well, looking at a bunch of interesting things just for patrons. Or, you get ad-free audio for Loose Ends, the ability to ask me and guest questions, access to the Discord to discuss this after it comes out with me and the community. Remember, we cannot do this with our patrons. We're really actually stagnating a little bit at about 1,100 patrons. We really want to get to the next level so we can start doing more video episodes and more consistent quality. There's a lot of products I'd like to be able to pay to render before I have official pictures I can share. So remember, can't do this without those guys. And otherwise, just do what you can. Support our sponsors. Subscribe to Broken Silicon. Give us a review on your podcast app of choice. And tell your friends about us. But otherwise, I think that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, I don't do this alone. Moore's Law is Dead is a team with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and special assistance by Carbon Cry. Find all of our information, including the information of sponsors you can support, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. If you would like to send fan mail or hardware to us, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead at P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. And speaking of fans, patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content possible. The aging business model of spamming ads all over the content is dying. The future of media will be built on fans paying for the content they actually want to exist. And so if you have the extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who would love to meet you and talk to you about computer hardware. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the entire back catalog of Flyover States podcasts and other projects Moore's Law Z has done, and thanks in the credits of videos and other perks as well. And hey, if you can't afford to support us, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media, Reddit, and forums. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or your preferred podcast app. All of this really does help so much. And if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, hire Tom for consulting, or are a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its patrons supporting it, and so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Full, AV, Anthony Gareffa, Greg Pataki, Muhammad Akwari, Brett Jones, Aaron Close, BBC 1600 XT Big Sexy, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, Ivan K, Brian Riggleman, Joaquin Hagan, Sam Miller, Deke, Thomas Rupp, The Mechanical Philosopher, Terrence Herod, SNES Chalmers, Tom Bailey, Greg T. Wanchik, Andrew S., Dane Galanowski, Daniel D., MJB1, Eric Jackson, Justice Brennan, Sammy Good, Valco Malev, The Boss Haas, I Love You, Lynn and Jim, Spam G. Spamtram, Jonathan, Jeremy So, General Jips, Blake, Franco Frederick, Matthew Lazier, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Azira, Gregory S. Acker, Dominique Koch, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, My Name is Nobody, Caillou Markelli, Hard4Room.com, Original Ross, Slicky, Stefan, Martin, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Christopher A. Butler, Jeremy Scalen, Sarcasio, Stephen Hart, Jason B., Meat and Pork, Stu, Tim Robb, Luis Correa, Ian Clifford, Jesse Jeskowiak, Travis Gooding, Holden Mobley, Nanian, Chris Rich, Deepest Learners, Mad, Sutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Medjman Oshley, Sammy Malas, Greg, Trini, Patrick Gross, Amiable Chief, Brett Summers, Danny Nugent, Arcane 311, Tommy, Kundin, Brucha, Mark Mitchell, John Wisink, Delman Peterson, James Anderson, Y Truey, Mark Raidmaker, Seth Dommings, 3DS Boy 08, Al Buma, Norithiel, Matthew Landavazo, Stefan, Cole Addict, Henry Chang, Judson N, F7GOS, The Grid, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Jason Bowen, Noah Nocoela, Hexa Puma, Chrysantine, Jerome Ferriera, Zabeat03, Desist, Thomas A. Teff, Klein Britannian, DNA Tech 50C, Desert, Axel Cisneros, Royce Meyer, Charles Russell, Reginald Aria, MORF1US, Teak Autumn, Jackson Miller, JSMMH, Sandy Garrido Saunderson, Davin Eastland, Fire Falcon on YouTube, Andre Jacques, Game and Sixth Reagan, Jeff Sandler, Eric Osborne, Loophole 35, Winstar, Joker, James 1 Rounder, Raider, Corey, Leonard, and Semi Molas. Of course, thank you to Sahara for the music. And geez, thanks I got through that. I'm falling asleep, everybody. Sorry if I stumbled through some of those. Take care.